Yeah, good morning, good evening. Thank you for the invitation and also for the really interesting presentations and discussions. And of course, for the opportunity to share UNDP's digital support for the operationalization of Article 6. UNDP, together with UNFCCC, the World Bank, EBRD, and AITA collaborate through the working group on Digital for Climate. The objective here is to build and pilot modular components for the whole ecosystem needed to digitize the generation, the reporting, and the transfer of carbon assets. And through this working group, through Digital for Climate, we coordinate capacity building and also technical infrastructure development with other working group members. Next slide. As a digital solution to simplify the complete workflow for project developers and streamline authorization and issuance processes for governments, on a linked registry, we have developed the Carbon Cooperation Platform. The security of the platform was assessed by the UN International Computing Center and UNDP's Information Security Team. We also have a two-factor authentication and authorization process to restrict what the different users have access to on the platform. And all ITMO project processes can be managed and implemented on the platform through different registered country users, for example, country administrator, validators, verifiers, and project developers. But the key feature of the platform is that it is modular, and all models are fully developed and therefore easily amendable and scalable for the addition of or for the inclusion of new countries. And this can be done really quickly and at low cost. Next slide. On this slide, you can see a monitoring app, which is linked to the monitoring section of the platform. And this app was specifically created for an agricultural project, which we currently implement in Ghana. These monitored parameters follow requirements of an internationally recognized methodology. And this app also shows monitoring report archives, which will be created for each year and each project beneficiary, so that each beneficiary, in this case farmers, can see the revenues generated each year. And so far, the platform spaces have been created for Vanuatu, Georgia, Ukraine, Malawi, Morocco, and Uruguay. And we are expanding the platform to new countries that are interested to engage in Article 6. Next slide. But in order to offer a truly end-to-end digital system, we have linked the platform with a digital public good registry, which was developed by UNDP. And we are currently also in the process of linking the platform to the World Bank Core registry on the Climate Action Data Trust. The UNDP Digital Public Good National Registry was developed to ensure accurate accounting of issuances, holdings, transfers, acquisitions, and cancellations of ITMOs. And this dashboard, the dashboard that you can see on the slide, provides a good overview of a country's carbon transactions, including by location, by quantities, and by type. It's also customized per user type, so that governments, for example, or project owners or certifiers know exactly the actions they need to take. It is already fully coded and offered to countries in connection with the Carbon Cooperation Platform, but also alone. And the setup of the registry will happen on the national government servers. So it's not a UNDP managed registry. It will be transferred to the government servers, and this will be done, of course, in close collaboration with national IT experts in the host country. Next slide. And Vanuatu is one of the countries that has already a completed national registry. The Department of Climate Change in Vanuatu acts as Article 6 Secretariat and also as registry administrator. And this registry is developed in the form of a standardized electronic database, which contains common data elements relevant for the different steps that are required in the implementation, so issuance, holding, transfer, acquisition, cancellations, as already mentioned. The registry has different accounts. So, for example, a pending account for the Department of Climate Change, into which ITMOs are issued before being transferred to other accounts. Then a holding account for also for the Department of Climate Change. The national account to hold and transfer ITMOs corresponding also to the share of proceeds that Vanuatu is keeping, 5% of issued ITMOs. Then a cancellation account to cancel ITMO units against cancellation or retirement requests, a holding account for project proponents, but also holding accounts for bilateral partners, so for example, for Switzerland. And each registry participant within the registry has also a unique account number. And the registry can also issue multiple reports from the ITMO registry. Next slide. Vanuatu can also submit the national consolidated inventory report because the national registry is linked to the national MRV system through an integrated tool. And this integrated tool or MRV tool is a web-based system designed to address the national UNFCCC reporting requirements. It was built following really an extensive stakeholder consultation process and has a few overarching components. So, for example, one of the it has actually several modules, and one is a module for monitoring mitigation actions, one for monitoring and reporting on adaptation actions, financial flows, and also the national GHG emission reporting and inventorying. But an additional interesting component is also reporting towards SDGs. So the impacts of climate change actions, both mitigation and adaptation, can also be reported through this tool. It is fully embedded in the national monitoring arrangements and monitoring indicators and parameters that are required and critical requirement and needs for Vanuatu tracked through this registry, including, for example, at action level, at sectoral or at subsector level. And it is a similar MRV system has been set up also for other countries that requested it. So, for example, Kenya has now a fully operational MRV system, Uganda as well, and recently also the Gambia system was completed. In Vanuatu, the national MRV system, the registry, and the Carbon Cooperation Platform are now fully interlinked and operational and provide really an end-to-end digital system that we would also like to set up and establish for other countries. And it will be put to a first test later this year when Vanuatu will authorize the first ITMO, not authorized, but verify the first ITMOs from the just authorized project. So yeah, we are already excited to see how the first issuance will be done on the platform. But thank you so much, and back to you.
Oh, thank you very much, Alexandra. So yeah, after you see our World Bank presentation, I would like to take our questions from the floor. So now our second presenter is Hari Gande from the World Bank. So Hari-san, over to you.
Thank you, Kantara-san. Good morning, good evening to everyone from Washington, D.C. If you put my slides up. So in my presentation, I am going to show or introduce to you all the work that the bank is doing, to help countries with the implementation of needed infrastructure under different initiatives that the bank manages. Next slide. Yeah, this is just to introduce basically the different accounting, reporting, tracking requirements and the different articles of the Paris Agreement, and then how much actually effort that countries need to make to better understand, and also to make a decision on different tools, systems that might be needed to support fulfilling many of these requirements. And the bank is helping, of course, in many countries that we operate, basically to understand all these requirements, and also to think through different open source tools that are available, of course, not just under the bank, but also, of course, our partners like UNDP and also UNFCCC and EBRD and others, and then help them to implement them through to different support mechanisms. Next slide. Of course, this is in many of the countries that the bank operates also have national domestic carbon market, carbon pricing instruments, and they also have some kind of a infrastructure to to support implementation of those things. And then how basically then we need to set up the needed infrastructure to meet the, of course, the requirements of the international carbon markets. Whether it makes sense for the countries to develop some different systems, or the existing systems could be enhanced, and then what the implications of that thing, but most importantly, what the institutional and governance arrangement that should be put in place around it, infrastructure, so as to operate smoothly and also efficiently. Of course, in this context, the work, of course, where the bank is doing under the Partnership for Market Implementation, to 17 countries that are considering implementing domestic carbon pricing, is providing a very excellent, actually, experience, and also some of the challenges that we encounter with their implementation. Next slide. This, of course, like as Alexandra also mentioned, some of the work that we are also doing in countries is to where the countries have already decided to implement some kind of a domestic registry. So then how do we actually link those registries to the Climate Action Data Trust that the World Bank supported developing under the Climate Warehouse program, and then, of course, also to increase the transparency of the systems, but of course, most importantly, to see that what kind of registry infrastructure that should be put in place, and what are the different functionalities such kind of registry can support, depending on the needs of the host country. The idea here is, of course, obviously, to consider the necessary requirements that are looking by the host countries, and then their capacity to operate such kind of systems, then how actually it aligns or interacts with some of the things that are happening at the international level. The whole objective is, of course, obviously, to support the transactions, and of course, and then to help them to participate in the international carbon markets, but while, of course, addressing the risk of double counting and double climbing issues. Next slide. This is the program under which the most of the support that the bank does in this area. This is a Climate Warehouse program under which we do work under two specific pillars. Pillar one is the piloting and developing global public goods. There we prototype, we pilot, and then test the different configurations of the systems. The work that happened so far are still continuing is on these four things, like national MRV systems, something similar to what Alex mentioned previously. And then, of course, national carbon registries. Here we have two different configurations of these registries. And then of course, also we are now prototyping at the testing the tokenization of the credits from these registries, and also supporting countries to connect to the Climate Action Data Trust. But of course, it all depends on the country's interest, and then their decision on what kind of systems that they want to have in their configurations, etc. And of course, like we have this Digital for Climate working group that Alex mentioned, and which, of course, we collaborate with the partners that I listed here to ensure that we don't duplicate the efforts, and then how do we actually ensure that these are open source, modular, and interoperable, so that countries have multiple options to choose from these tools, that meets up with their requirements. And the pillar 2 is, of course, the capacity building, where we develop the knowledge products and then assist countries to identify best practices and also to encourage international and national cooperation, especially in the context of things that are happening at the national level. Next slide. This is the entire, of course, end-to-end ecosystem which that the bank is working right now, and to help countries starting from the digital MRV at the project level, and then integrating the digital MRV into the national MRV systems, so that facilitates real-time data collection and then quantification of the emission reduction credits and so on and so forth. And then, of course, connecting to the registry if the country has such kind of national level registry, and then, of course, help them with the process that is needed from the normal process that these projects face, right, the independent validation, registration, and issuance, and then so on and so forth in authorization. Because, of course, some of the countries that the bank is working, where countries actually developing their own the process and then the standards at the domestic level for a particular sector, and then which they wanted to have a full control over the process until the authorization of these credits. So in such scenario, that means how do we actually help these countries to go through this kind of a process is what actually we are looking at. And then, of course, connecting these registries to the Climate Action Data Trust, so that the information that is available on the Climate Action Data Trust can be used by the market participants for different services that are listed here. Next slide. This is basically how it looks. The main functionalities of the MRV and registry systems together in a country that has both systems in place. So these both systems, of course, will communicate each other. Basically, MRV system it basically helps them to track the emissions and then can quantify the emission reductions, and also track the finance flows to these mitigation projects in different sectors. And of course, it also produces some standard reports that could be used for different purposes. And then, of course, the registry has some standard functionality, something similar to what the UNDP has also developed. These are, of course, open sourced and available countries, so free of cost in a sense. Of course, if there are any customization is required, and then the functionalities need to be enhanced, that needs to be, of course, done through the additional resources. But the idea here is basically to help countries, if they decide to have their own registry, to have these systems with the minimal costs. Of course, these are, of course, the bank has developed these under the Partnership for Market Readiness program, and then we enhance or strengthen those systems to meet most of the requirements right now under the Paris Agreement, and then of course we are rolling out in interested countries, and then learning the lessons, basically, like how these systems will serve the purpose, and then what the challenges, and then their usability for the future. Next slide. As I said, there are two configurations of the registry that the bank offers: the core registry and enhanced registry. Basically, one is the technology difference. Core registry is fully built on blockchain technology, whereas enhanced registry is a normal traditional technologies like .NET and Microsoft Server, etc. And then, of course, core registry also has a functionality to as a tool to digitize the carbon credits of the transactions in wallets, and then of course the enhanced registry is directly embedded into the national MRV system, so that gives an option for the countries to quantify the emission reductions, and then also facilitate independent validation, registration, etc. Through the electronic means. And of course, it's also easy for enhanced registry to manage the multi-stakeholder accounting process. And then, of course, in the core registry, it's fully manual entry, where the countries can just enter the information related to the units, just like what is needed for the tracking purposes. Next slide. yeah, this just gives the comparison of say some of the functionalities and then what the core registry can support and then what the enhanced registry can support. Yeah, next one. This is of course the approach that we follow to help countries to assess the infrastructure needs, and then according to this one based on this identifying the gaps and then the need, then of course capacity building needs, and then of course also if they need any regulatory support, including the developing any legislation and the institutional arrangement around it, and accordingly the scope will be defined, and then the bank customizes this support accordingly. I'm not going to go through into all the things that of course we normally look into, but these are of course the very standard things like what for what purpose this is needed, and then what is the what the challenges, and then if they have already existing systems and etc. And then yeah, so and so forth. And then of course the most important point is also the maintenance requirements, that because it's not just having a tool is just a tool, and then but the the real challenge is with its operational and then the governance and institutional arrangement that I mentioned. And then obviously no country wants to have a complex and then very sophisticated system that that may not serve the actual purpose, depending on the number of projects that the country wants to develop on the track. So this is basically a dilemma many of countries are facing in terms, especially in African continent. Like they wanted to have the registry, but at the same time they also wanted to know is it really necessary, and then what are the options that exist, and then how to make use of the international registry that UNFCCC develops, and so on and so forth. Next slide. So these are some early observations until today based on our experience. Obviously, the countries that are already engaged in Article 6.2, many countries like Switzerland, Sweden, etc. Mentioned those developing countries that have a corporate approaches to those countries. They are ahead, in fact, in the plans to establish such kind of systems. And then if the countries have some already established data management systems, so the effort is basically how do we build upon the existing systems. But again, it's not a straightforward process again based on our experience so far because of the compatibility issues and then the need for to upgrade those systems and the costs associated. And then obviously many countries are looking to have a very simplified registry systems and over having a national MRV system also to track the emissions and emission reductions, and then integrating that into the national inventories as well. But of course, there are countries are realizing the importance of those having a MRV system also, and then looking for different solutions. And then, as I said, countries are still, the process of understanding what this UNFCCC registry meant for them, and then how it supports, and then in that context, like whether it makes sense for them to have a so-called national level registry. I mean, it's like there is no. Again, we are also struggling to find basically like the country wants to develop from scratch such kind of a system. How much it is going to cost? As New Zealand mentioned, of course, it's a very complex process, both in terms of the timing and then the resources that are needed. They could vary from 50,000 to 500,000 or even more actually, depending on the complexity of the system. So that's again one of the challenges that countries are facing. And of course, like some countries are actually having the systems and then of course developing the policy framework to govern them. But some countries obviously have the policy framework right now, and then now looking to develop these systems based on the legislation that they set up. Yeah, I mean, it's like again one of the main we are working at least in 9 countries that are implementing domestic carbon pricing, and then there again, as I mentioned at the beginning, like having how to actually configure the systems that serves both purposes, and then how to optimize the institutional and governance arrangements around it is basically one of the critical things that we implement. Yeah, next slide. This is my final. I mean, some early challenges, and of course these are very obvious, basically for many of us working in this space. Like, yes, resources is definitely one of the one of the challenges actually many of the countries, because Ministry of Environments are the one that owns these systems, and then they lack the, of course, manpower, especially even the basic IT expert to look into the systems, and then having a registry administrator that manages all these things is a huge task for them. And then maintenance is one big challenge. Having a system is only a very initial part of this entire equation, and then how do we actually manage and maintain the systems for a long time? How do we actually secure the resources? Ideally, from their national budget process is again not a straightforward process. And then of course, developing these systems within the government's own IT policies. Mainly, when it comes to the security of the systems, and then ownership, like where these systems need to be deployed. Is it in a cloud environment, or it will be managed by third parties, or it should be just a simple computer within the Ministry of Environment? I mean, what it means basically, to the security of the systems and etc. And then of course the quality of the data, planning these things in a timely manner is of course continues to be a challenge even today in many of these countries. And then of course, obviously, there are few countries that also wanted to have registries that are capable of transacting with other registries. But again, it's like there is a huge complex process, like in the absence of some standard communication protocols, like how do we actually connect these registries that actually develop on different platforms, and then the different requirements, especially the security concerns. So these are some of the early observations and some challenges that we noticed until date. And then of course it's the learning by doing process right now. And then, but of course, fortunately, the countries are learning very fast, and then helping basically others also to understand these key challenges, and then so that the process becomes a little bit more manageable. I would stop here and then back to Kentaro-san.